Hello and welcome back. As you can see, I am back in the Colbert. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there is a link in the description to the first video I did about Colbert a few days after it was released. Because on the release day I did the whole reset and used enough free XP to unlock it without really having to play more than 5 games. And by then I still only played it quite limited number of games. So I tried to have my commentary quite balanced, talking about my initial impressions and what was good and bad. Since then I have been playing the ship a bit more, and I have also really tried to make it work. Sadly, I don't think it actually does work, and that is perhaps the main purpose of this video, even though this particular game is not too bad at all. I will also compare it quite a bit with the Smolensk, seeing as they came out at the same time and have the same main features, which is the 16 small caliber guns with high rate of fire. And so it's a good thing that I have Pref in my division playing the Smolensk, so that we can easily at times see the differences. We also have Sol with us, who is playing the Kremlin. But for this game, the main focus is Colbert and to some extent the Smolensk. Now, in the beginning of the game, I try to stick close to Pref so that I can utilize his smoke. If you have watched my first video on Colbert, you will know that a well-placed smoke in the right situation can be an amazing tool for the Colbert, simply because it allows you to spam your HE without any risk to your very limited and not very armored HP. We also quite early on here see the perhaps biggest problem with the Colbert, especially compared to the Smolensk, which is the extremely high shell arcs. The time indicator, of course, when I shoot at Alaska, tells the time to the island, so it's a bit misleading, even though here I'm shooting the Alsace and it shows better, but it takes forever for the shells to hit. Which means that unless you're shooting at a stationary ship, actually hitting it is quite difficult, because it requires so little in the amount of changing course or speed for the shells to miss, or in case you're shooting a battleship, hit places where you don't do any damage because you can't bend armor. Even with IFHE, you only really pen superstructure on battleships. So it's that and fires that will be your way of taking them down. Cruisers are of course easier because they're less armored, but if they are moving, it's quite challenging to hit them. Alaska is a quite big ship and it's not moving too much, but even so I'm having some issues shooting over 2 islands and actually hitting him. But at this point I'm starting to get my aim right, and we see a situation where the Colbert has really good potential, where you can simply spam a stationary slow-moving ship and you can get a good amount of damage. The problem, as you see just there, is that well, the ship has absolutely no armor and it takes huge amount of damage from basically everything. And because you need to be very precise with your guns to do damage, like I mentioned before, and really try to be on top of predicting what the enemy is doing to hit, it is easy to get distracted and not notice the amount of ships that are aiming at you, like you saw happen there. And then you get punished. But I still managed to do a fair amount of damage to the Alaska in a short amount of time. Of course I had help with the fires, but even so, it shows some good potential there at least. Sol is being torped, and as I turn around, I see the smoke that the torps were coming from. So I instantly speed boost my way over there, and once I get closer I will activate my hydro to try and deal with Kirakazu that is hiding in the smoke. In my previous Colbert video, I had a DD for some strange reason rushing the position where I was at. And, well, he took a lot of damage and died fairly quickly. And this is another example of exactly the same thing. Now this ship has about 15,500 HP when I detect them with my hydro. And at this range, it doesn't really require that much prediction to hit him. And in less than 15 seconds he's dead. And I did about 10k of those 15.5. Pref helped with some, and maybe there was other ship shooting as well, but basically mostly me, melted him in seconds. And that is also one of the strengths of the Colbert. If you end up very close to a DD, you will do massive amount of damage. But with distance, you very quickly start losing that advantage, and you will have a hard time hitting, just as with a cruiser or even a battleship, because you're so limited in where you can hit him. And again, that is due to the very high gun arcs and long travel time, and the limited HE pen. Now, luckily enough, the enemy team has died on the western side, and all remaining ships have moved over to the east. And this enables me to sit behind this large island and start spamming ships, which is what you really want to do in the Colbert. Either sit behind an island or in smoke, where you can be safe and just go to town with whatever you can shoot at. And we see that Alaska again. Even if you try to predict, you will quite often be a bit wrong, and it takes so long for you to correct it because the travel time again is so long. Even though I can do good damage to Alaska, if I mess up my aim a bit, it will take a long time for my correction to get right, and I lose valuable damage and time in doing so. Yamato, a very similar situation. I need to get my aim right, but of course he disappears from time to time. Get some fires, which helps. But we also see that there are so many of the shells that I shoot that are non-penetrations. And unless you happen to be basically the god of prediction and aiming, you will see that the majority of your shells will be non-penetrations, especially when shooting at battleships. But regardless of that, like I've said, this is the situation you want to be in. You want to be behind an island and spam HE. Now that seems simple enough, but most of the time you can't just go behind a random island or even a well-planned island and sit there and spam. Because you are so reliant on what your team is doing and what the enemy team is doing. Because you might go to an island that is a really good position, but then all of a sudden your team dies or just leaves. Which means that the enemy team can push through a ship or two and you're detected and, well, like you saw earlier, you will melt really fast. 2 citadels and you're basically done. And that is comparison to the Smolensk, which can always smoke up and be more or less safe unless they are in radar range. And also because of the much more comfortable shell arcs, it's easier to sit at range and spam than it is in the Colbert. Now again, Pref smokes up and I can reverse back into the smoke and try to utilize this as best as I can. But even at this range, we see the difference in the shells from myself and Pref and how much easier it is for him to hit things. Now of course the Smolensk has the same issue with penning battleship, but it is so much easier to get your aim right when your shells land much faster. But this game has actually been not too bad for me. I managed to get a decent amount of damage. I think it will be one of my better games actually. And I will kill this Musashi and get my third kill as well. But even so, you see the amount of shells I put out and how much I try, and you really get nothing for free. And that's fine, but when there are so many other ships that get so much more for so much less work, it can be really frustrating. The game is about to end. I will kill the Musashi and they will lose another ship, and as I get my wither I will leave this and continue in the result screen. So, the result screen. We see that in this game I managed to get almost 158,000 damage, which is a pretty good result in the Colbert. You can get more. I've done that a couple of times, but there are many times when you get significantly less. Either because you get deleted from some stray shells, or because you simply can't hit the spots you need to do damage. 3 kills, 11 fires, which gave me the Witherer. So, still not a terrible game. In the team score, we see that I managed to end up third in this game, beating both Pref and Sol, which is not too common in the Colbert because, like I've been saying, you don't do particularly much damage. And even though I'm quite okay with the results of this game, it's still quite depressing to see that you don't do better with the game you play. And that can be really shown when we go into the detailed report. Now, like I said, 158,000 damage, about 96 from the main battery and 62 from the fires. But what we see is that I fired exactly 2,000 shells and I hit almost 600. And even though I did that, I only did 96,000 damage. Now in something like Harugumo or Wooster, something that gets 32mm pens, if you would hit 600 shells, you would do so much damage simply because there are more places on ships where you can pen and get some damage from that as well. Whereas if I shoot at a battleship, I am extremely limited, and if I shoot at anything that is moving, I have to aim so far ahead and predict very precisely what the enemy will be doing in order to actually get any good hits. And again, compare that to the Smolensk, which has much more comfortable shell arcs. And even though the same thing is true for the Smolensk with the penetration is slightly higher, but not enough to do any actual difference because of the different armor levels. But hitting the spots you want is much easier, which means that you can get more damage with less effort. And that is one of the huge differences between the ships, like I've touched a bit on before. And when you add to that the Smolensk gets the smoke, even though it has an easier time shooting at range, then you get a position where you're wondering, how did this happen? In general, my feeling when playing both of these ships is that I think that wargaming has actually messed these two up, in that it is the Smolensk that should be the roaming cruiser that spams HE from close to maximum range, because it can do that fairly easily. And it is the Colbert that you get the smokes, that you can get in close, smoke up, and actually be able to hit things that you aim at. Because most of the time you will be forced to be in long enough ranges that hitting will just be so hard, or will require so much focus that you will do as I did in this game, forget that there are other ships in the game and you will be deleted or close to it. So I think that actually that would be a fairly decent balancing method between these two ships. Because as it stands right now, the Smolensk is immensely powerful, but the Colbert just isn't. And you can actually notice that when playing the Colbert and the Smolensk, that if you're in the Colbert and you're shooting at something, apart from the number of shells that can be quite scary for players, they quickly realize that they don't really do any damage. And that will basically allow them to not care about what you're doing and push against you or do something, whatever else they need to do. And they won't really be punished that much. In Smolensk it will be slightly easier because you can be in the smoke where you're safe, compared to the Smolensk that will be deleted from basically a sneeze. And also compare that to the Worcester or Haragumo, which can pen 42mm, where the shells actually do damage on more places. So I think that giving Colbert smoke instead of Smolensk could be a pretty good improvement. Alternatively, I guess you could also make sure that the Colbert gets the 32mm pen, simply because it will allow you to not be so reliant on perfect aim and perfect prediction, which you really need in this ship. Also, because the Smolensk, at least for me, is just more comfortable when kiting, not only because you have an easier time hitting things at range, but also because it doesn't seem to take as many random citadels as the Colbert does, which makes it easier to survive and be effective for a longer period of time. And then of course you can always smoke up in the Smolensk and be really annoying. Plus you have the torps. So I just feel like they have messed those two ships up. severely. And actually it is that the Colbert has a slightly higher alpha HE damage than the Smolensk. But even so, people don't really fear the Colbert, because it's so easy to take out, and also so easy to just tank. Whereas the Smolensk can, not at will, but fairly often, pop the smoke, and then there's not too much that you can do unless you're really good at shooting into smoke, which not all players are. And I think that pretty much brings me to my conclusion from my experience in Colbert. I am not the best player on the server. I am definitely good and I know what I'm doing. But there will always be players that can make any ship work, and you might see replays or commentaries of that and think that, yeah, that Colbert looks awesome. But what you have to remember is that a good player can make any ship look good. And again, I'm not the best, but I'm definitely not bad either. And I have been struggling to make this work. So I think that for most players, this ship really isn't worth it. It requires so much of you, and the return you get for that is very limited, unless you have really good luck with teams, maybe have help with some divisions or whatever. But most games you will just struggle to be effective in any way. So, based on my experience, I would actually say that if you are doing the line resets and trying to get these new tokens or whatever, I would urge you to not get the Colbert, at least not in its current state. If you like BBs, I would actually recommend you to hold on to them until the Ohio is available, because that ship actually looks good and fun to play, whereas the Colbert is just exhausting. And at one point in this evening when I was playing the Colbert, Sol actually told me to just stop playing the Colbert already, because I was not having a good time, and again, it just takes so much out of you to get any kind of results. And even if you try to do everything right and you do everything right, there will still be these random shells that will just delete you. So it's not exactly a rewarding ship, not even if you play it well. So basically you need your team to play the game in a way that fits you, and the same for the enemy team. And that is quite rare. And because you can't really create your own situations like the Smolensk with the smoke, you basically have a really bad time in a Colbert. So, yeah, my recommendation, like I said, if they don't do anything about the Colbert, don't bother. Especially not if you're not a really good player that really knows how to aim and predict. Because if you don't, you're gonna have a way worse time than I have had in this ship, and I've had some really good games. I mean, this was not bad, and the other game that I uploaded was actually really good. But again, it requires specific situation and very much of the player that plays the ship. Well, yeah, I hope that you have been able to get a better feeling from the Colbert from these two replays, and that you have enjoyed watching them, and can maybe make up your mind more easily if you think it's worth getting. Like I said, my recommendation is to not do it, because even if you are an amazing player, you're probably not going to have a good time. Just play the Smolensk instead, because it's does the same thing but just better in every single way. And then hold on to your tokens for Ohio or another ship. unless they do something about the Colbert. Like, for example, take the smoke from the small lens and give to the Colbert, or give the Colbert the 32mm pen. But for now, I don't think it's worth the trouble. Yeah, that's basically it from my second Colbert video. Again, I hope you have enjoyed, and I will see you next time.